Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are cracking open a really fascinating document, the official report of the Imperial British East Africa Company. This is them, in their own words, telling their side of a story about big ambitions, intense rivalries, and, well, money problems in 19th century Africa.
Okay, so before we jump in, we've got to get our heads around this key idea, a chartered company. What was it? Well, think of it like this. It's a private business, but it's on a public mission. The British Crown would give them a royal charter, which was basically a license to go out and trade, explore, and even govern huge territories on behalf of the empire. It was empire building, but, outsourced.
So we're going to walk through the company's story in 4 main parts, and we're using their own report as our map. We'll start with their big mission statement, then get into the rivals they were up against, the huge push into Uganda, and finally, the crushing cost of the whole thing.
Right, so what was this company trying to do? Well, the way they frame it in this report, it wasn't just some business venture. Oh no, it was a grand patriotic duty.
And this quote right here, it's really the key to how they saw themselves. They're making an argument. They're basically saying, look, without a private company like us, one that can mix profit-seeking with colonial policy, there's no way Britain could have gotten a foothold in this massive territory. They're positioning themselves as the essential pioneers for the nation, doing the dirty work the government couldn't, or maybe just wouldn't, do itself.
So you got to understand, they were playing a two-sided game to get their authority. On the one hand, they had a concession from the Sultan of Zanzibar that gave them the right to run the valuable coastal strip, which gave them a kind of local legitimacy. But then on the other hand, they had the royal charter from back home in Britain. That was their imperial stamp of approval, giving them the power to push deep into the interior, way beyond where the Sultan's power reached.
Okay, so let's see how this all played out on the ground. Because the company wasn't operating in some empty space. Not at all. It was a major player in that chaotic period we called the Scramble for Africa.
This whole era was about drawing lines on maps back in Europe. You had Britain and Germany, the 2 big players in East Africa, literally carving up the continent into what they called spheres of influence. And this company gets started right in the middle of this high-stakes game. It basically found itself on the front line of a really fierce rivalry.
And let me tell you, this report is absolutely dripping with frustration about it. The way the company sees it, they were being constantly hassled and undermined. They talk about the incessant intrigues and encroachments of their German rivals. It paints a picture of this relentless, grinding, low-level conflict.
And they give this one story that is just wild. It's meant to show how bad things got. They talk about this German explorer, a Dr. Peters, who they claim marched up the Tana River, shot a local chief, publicly burned the company's treaty and flag, and then put up a German one. I mean, this isn't just quiet diplomacy. This was direct, aggressive, and sometimes violent stuff happening on the ground.
Now, all this constant pressure from their German rivals seems to have forced the company to push deeper and faster into the continent, maybe faster than they'd planned, and they were racing towards what they saw as the ultimate prize.
The report makes it crystal clear that getting control of the Kingdom of Uganda was their #1 goal. It was the most important and, as it turns out, the most expensive thing they did. But why, right? What was so special about this particular place?
Well, according to the company, Uganda was the strategic heart of the whole region. It wasn't just that it was fertile land with a lot of people. It was about geography. It controlled the headwaters of the Nile River, a huge deal geopolitically. They saw it as the gateway to the rest of Central Africa. And the kingdom itself was powerful. Getting them on your side was the key to controlling the whole area. And the report also makes a point of saying its people had a higher intellectual development, which to them made their allegiance even more critical. And to back up their push inward, the report includes this letter. It's a direct invitation from Mwanga, the King of Buganda. He's not just saying, come on in. He's promising ivory. He's promising trade. For the company, this was like a golden ticket. It was the proof they needed that their presence wasn't just strategic, it was actually wanted.
So this invitation eventually leads to a formal treaty. And the terms are just incredible. The king agrees to the company's suzerainty, their overlordship. This lets the company put its own official there, a resident with real power. They get to co-manage the state's money and even organize the army. In exchange for protection, this private British company was effectively handed the keys to the kingdom.
But as you can imagine, securing this prize and trying to run a massive territory, it came with a huge price tag. And this brings us to the real heart of this entire report, the whole reason they wrote it down. Okay, so here's the bottom line. The company is making a desperate plea.
It's arguing, hey, we did all the hard, expensive work. We secured a huge piece of Africa for the British Empire, but now we're broke. The private money had run out. They were saying that this whole thing had become a national project, and it just wasn't possible for a private business to keep footing the bill.
And this number right here, it just says it all. £250 per ton. That was the mind-boggling cost just to get supplies from the coast to Uganda. It was a complete logistical and financial nightmare. Every single tool, every bag of rice had to be carried by human porters for over 700 miles. A cost like that just kills any chance of ever making a profit.
So what was the company's solution? A railway. They argued it would slash these transport costs and really open up the region for good. But they insisted building it was a national job, not a private one. And this chart about the initial survey funding tells you everything you need to know. Look at that. The British government paid for the vast majority of it. That's a huge sign that the state was already having to step in with cash. And throughout the report, the company keeps making this really bitter comparison. They point to other companies like the Royal Niger Company, which got a massive government grant to get started. They point to their main rival, the German company, which was getting all sorts of subsidies. Meanwhile, they claim they got nothing, no direct aid, and they weren't even allowed to raise their own money from things like alcohol taxes. The message is pretty clear. We feel like we were set up to fail.
And these are the last recorded words of the company's founder, Sir William Mackinnon. It's such a powerful defense of what they did. He's arguing that all the money they burned through wasn't for profits. He even claims the company never traded, but was all spent on securing national objects for Britain. He died believing that history would prove him right, that the land they'd acquired for the empire would one day be seen as priceless.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, the company's own report tells this incredible story of imperial ambition colliding head-on with financial reality. It shows us how these private companies were used as pawns in a huge geopolitical game, forced into expensive land grabs by their rivals, and how, in the end, this whole massive enterprise basically turned into one big plea for a government bailout.
And we'll leave you with that final thought, a question that really gets to the core of this document and the complicated, messy era it came from. Thanks for joining us for The Explainer.